Hello again everyone, welcome back to the channel, and to something of a companion piece to one of my previous videos. Just north of London's Westminster Bridge stands this statue, the statue of Boudica. She's standing in a scythed chariot, arms aloft with a spear pointing towards the sky. Her two daughters are being shielded in her shadow. This statue shows both chaos and composure. Her two horses seem like they're about to bolt, but she seems perfectly in control. Since she first appeared in Roman writings, Boudica has come to represent many things: an exotic foreign queen, a noble savage, and the destructive wrath of a woman scorned. But just how much of Boudica is actually backed up by evidence, and how much of her is myth? Well, today we are asking the question, just how real is Boudica? The first approach to this question should be to take the accounts of Tacitus and Cassius Dio at face value and see what they actually say. And as I say, this is a companion piece to my previous video on the Boudican Revolt, which you can find somewhere up there or down there. But let's take another brief look at what those sources say. According to Tacitus and Cassius Dio, Boudica was the wife of Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni, the tribe that lived in East Anglia. Prasutagus' coins survive to this day, giving us some proof of his reign. Boudica, on the other hand, is only known through literature. When Prasutagus died around 60 AD, he tried to safeguard his kingdom by dividing it in two between his daughters and Emperor Nero. But the Romans completely ignored this. They took the lot, flogged Boudica, and raped Boudica's two daughters. Outraged, Boudica rallied the Iceni, the Trinovantes, and other tribes into a full-blown revolt that razed Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium to the ground. If the ancient sources are to be believed, some 70 to 80,000 Romans and Britons were killed. Boudica is shown as a fearsome warrior who inspired great loyalty in her allies and terror in her enemies. Archaeological layers of burnt deposits, known as the Boudican Destruction Horizon, have been found in Colchester, London and St Albans that date around 60 to 61 AD, supporting the idea that there was a rebellion. And through this lens, there's very little reason to doubt the existence of Boudica. The Romans recorded events, often for propaganda purposes, but they were rarely in the habit of inventing entire prominent individuals, particularly those who reflected badly on their own administration. So through this reading, Boudica is a historical figure whose courage and wrath left an indelible mark on Roman Britain. Tacitus provides our earliest account of Boudica, writing nearly 40 years after the revolt, but his father-in-law, Agricola, was serving in Paulinus' army at the time, so it's likely that Tacitus drew on information from Agricola and other men who were present to get a first-hand knowledge of the revolt. And Tacitus presents Boudica as a wronged widow and then later a military leader rallying her people. Tacitus, however, is a master of historical rhetoric. His account is full of speeches, a common device in Roman historiography designed to give moral lessons rather than being a verbatim account of what was actually said. So Boudica's speech, where she rallies the troops to avenge her family and get rid of the Romans, was likely not word for word. It was likely written in Tacitus's normal style, in the best way that he thought to show the plight of the Britons. Tacitus also uses Boudica as a sharp contrast to Emperor Nero. In his account, Boudica is virtuous, courageous, and a commanding figure, all things that in Tacitus's eyes Nero was not. Tacitus presents Nero as vain, decadent, and effeminate. Boudica, on the other hand, he presents as leading from the front, striking fear into her enemies, a figure of righteous indignation. In portraying Boudica's heroism and Nero's incompetence simultaneously, Tacitus may be mocking the Roman emperor, highlighting the stark difference between the idealised virtuous Britons against the moral failings of Roman rulers. Boudica becomes in effect a literary foil, used to highlight the injustice of Roman rule and also the personal failings of the emperor himself. Boudica's name brings up interesting questions. It comes from the Celtic word meaning victory, so some have suggested that this means it was a symbolic title, that it wasn't actually her name. However, across Lusitania and parts of Gaul, inscriptions have been found of other people that have names from the same root. So it's very possible that she was called Boudica, that it wasn't just an honorific title or a propagandistic epithet. Now let's take a look at Cassius Dio's account of the rebellion, written around 150 years after the revolt. He offers us a physical description of Boudica. He describes her as very tall and terrifying in appearance, with long tawny hair coming down to her hips. She's meant to have a golden necklace, a tunic of many colours, and a mantle fastened by a brooch. Her glance is fierce, and her voice harsh. However, this description by Cassius Dio raises immediate questions. How could he possibly know what Boudica looked like? There were no coins, no statues, no contemporary portraits. So his description likely drew on imagination, stereotypes, and literary conventions. His image of a strong, fierce, alien woman is there as the image of the barbarian other, in stark contrast to Roman civility. So his Boudica is there to show how much of a threat she posed, and also to show the exotic nature of Britain itself. Dio also introduces the idea of Boudica engaging in sacrificial rites, giving her an invincible, almost divine quality. And this is here less as a historical thing and more as a literary device, there to heighten the drama and to reinforce Roman notions of the exotic and dangerous island of Britain. With all this in mind, another opinion is that a woman did lead a rebellion against the Romans, but they question the validity of Tacitus and Dio. They suggest that perhaps Boudica's story, although she may have been a real person, was perhaps embellished over decades of retelling, and that perhaps she was maybe little more than a figurehead, something that the tribes of Britain could rally around in fighting against the Romans. Here again the name is instructive. The fact that Boudica means victory does not preclude it from being a real personal name. There may have been many people in the Celtic and Roman worlds called Boudica, or some such variant. In fact, her name may have been amplified by Roman writers to show off her prominence in the revolt. So the Boudica of our sources could be a composite, part real leader, part symbolic vessel for rebellion, and part Roman moral exemplar. Our final stance is the most sceptical, and that's the idea that Boudica did not exist at all. Supporting this idea is the fact that the only sources we have for Boudica are from the Romans. They are distant and rhetorical. They are the likes of Tacitus, nearly 40 years later, or Cassius Dio, around 100 years after Tacitus. These are Roman authors, with Roman agendas and Roman literary conventions, and as a result, it's very difficult to separate fact from embellishment. The argument goes a bit further, with some saying that the gruesome details of the revolt, the vivid speeches, Boudica's appearance, have all been exaggerated, embellished, invented, repurposed by Roman writers for Roman audiences, making her more of a myth than a historical figure, and as a result she's more of a vessel for moral and political storytelling. Another point to make is that although our main sources are Tacitus and Cassius Dio, writing in the 1st to 3rd centuries AD, our earliest copies of their writings, regardless of Boudica, are the 9th century AD for Tacitus and the 5th or 6th centuries AD for Cassius Dio, meaning that their works aren't necessarily as reliable as you might think. The question of Boudica's historicity may never be resolved. She may have been just as the Romans described, or she may have been a real leader whose story was embellished, or she may simply be a symbolic figure, victory personified. Archaeology confirms the revolt, but leaves her elusive. Tacitus's rhetoric and his subtle mockery of Nero, and Cassius Dio's embellishment colour every account. So what do I think? Well, what is clear to me is that Boudica, whether historical or literary, has endured as a symbol. She embodies resistance, courage, and the terrifying potential of a wronged people. She is, in the end, less a historical figure and more a story that has survived over the centuries, a story that still captures our imagination. I think that the question of whether or not she is real, certainly in the way she's normally portrayed, is far less important than how her story has been interpreted over the last 2,000 years. For many people, she has become such an important symbol that has far surpassed the question of her historicity. But let me know what you think. I'll be very interested to know whether you think she's real or not. And if you haven't already, please remember to like, comment and subscribe. It helps immensely. And I'll see you on the next one. Ciao for now.